Welcome back. I'm happy to announce our final speaker. We just had some advice on how to communicate with policymakers from one of us, from one of our scientists that was doing the actual communicating herself. Then we've had the insight from a researcher that studies that process and gave valuable tips on how to do research for government. And now we have someone from government to actually talk to us about whether this is actually true and how this all should work. I'm really happy to introduce Robbert Verweij from Rijkswaterstaat. I tried to find it on the website. I have no idea what Rijkswaterstaat is in English. If you please introduce that part yourself.
Well, this is what they look like, policy advisors. Ta-ta! Welcome, my name is Robbert Verweij, and the fascinating thing is I try to be a little bit anonymous on the internet. First of all, I'm one of these okay boomer people, so I'm too old to be on the internet. I have two kids in the house that know TikTok and all this stuff. From time to time I sit next to them and then we look at what they actually do on the internet. But when Rolf invited me, he said, "Oh, you must bring one of these pictures." And of course, me being me, I forgot to upload any picture or anything. So then he said, "I got you a picture from the internet." And I said, "No, that's not professional. You use this picture," because the picture he found was this one. And I realized from the first brief from Kathleen that it's actually, you have to put your emotional self in the blah blah blah. So this is me. I do hold a PhD in math and physics, and I also have finished my study trumpet at the Rotterdam Codarts Conservatory. And I don't know what I like to do better. I think I like both my work and playing the trumpet. This was actually taken in Delft when Speakers was still there, so maybe I'm a bit old. It's good to be here as a policy advisor, indeed, yes. I am one of these guys that actually advises the minister. Currently I'm working at Rijkswaterstaat, but I have been working in the Ministry for Infrastructure and Water Management for about 13 years, working very closely with the ministers themselves. I've been working with Camille Eurlings for a long time. Very fascinating guy, was really into computer technology, and he was actually there when the first iPhone came out, and we were in a debate once in the parliament, and he said, look, Robert. And I thought, oh my God, something's wrong. And he said, there's rain in Valkenburg. He lived in Limburg, and there was the time when you could get the weather on your iPhone for the first time. So, fascinating guy. Then we worked with Melanie Schultz van Hagen, who of course introduced 130 kilometers per hour. I have a nice anecdote on that later. And currently I'm working with Mrs. Cora van Nieuwenhuizen on stint. We did the stint dossier together. Most of you probably will know what happened. It was a terrible accident where 4 kids were killed in an accident. And the question was whether the rules and regulations were in order. And it was a very emotional dossier for the minister. Most of you probably have seen the items on the internet where she was defending herself in parliament. I think it was a month, 2 months ago, where she really started crying in the parliament, and that wasn't played, that was honest. So just to show that also ministers are honest, real people with real emotions. Currently we are working together on the nitrogen crisis, and as a matter of fact, I think by the time that we end our lecture, on the internet you will find the letter that we are actually lowering the speed limits in the, I think, 2nd week of March. So probably by the time I end my lecture you will find news on the internet. The minister has written a letter to the parliament about lowering the speed limit from 130 to Holland. I was the guy who wrote the letter. Having said that, I'm in 2 worlds. I hold a PhD in maths and physics, so with one foot I'm one of you, basically. And with the other foot, I'm really into the politics, so I think I should be able to compare both worlds. And I will do that. And actually, the good thing about being the last speaker is that both speakers have already mentioned everything I want to say, so I can be very quickly. One of the things you should really take home is what Kathleen was saying. Realize that policymakers are not only concerned with what you scientists bring, but also what other people bring in. That's indeed one of the lessons you should really take home. Well, let's start with politics in general. of course, the trias politica, I asked my secretary to translate in English the slides, and she did a semi-good job, I suppose. But for those of you who do not speak English, try to do this. Wetgevende macht, rechterlijke macht. Of course, on the left, trias politica is well known. Everybody thinks it's Montesquieu 1755, but it's of course thousands of years old. The old Greek people already used this system, and every civilized society has some kind of balance between execution, legislative law, and the controlling power. And of course we also have that in the Netherlands. On top the wetgevende macht, that's of course the parliament, the second chamber, the first chamber. They're actually the boss. If they vote in favor, then it becomes legislation. If they do not vote in favor, it does not become legislation. It's as easy as that. On the left, the uitvoerende macht, that's us. That's the policy advisors, Tata. We are the ones that actually try to come up with the legislation. We think of the idea of lowering the speed limits. We think of the idea of increasing the boundary levels for this PFAS. Actually, when I walked in, many of you probably wouldn't have noticed, but all this stuff is about perfluoralkyd. So this is all PFAS. And the question is, does it harm the environment? I think it doesn't. You know, there's trees here, so I think it's a good job. And of course, on the right, though, there's the judges that check if the law is enforced. This is a bit naive to think that this is how it works. Because, yeah, and I don't know if you're allowed to ask it. Come on.
I always thought that the uitvoerende macht is the police.
No, well, the rechterlijke macht, you mean?
No. That are the judges.
No, de uitvoerende macht, no. There's of course different readings of it. No, it's really the idea, in the way that Montesquieu meant it, is there's one power that actually thinks of legislation. That's the government. That's us. And then there's one power that actually, how do you say, control that and say whether it's right or wrong, whether they agree or disagree. And that's really the duality that we have between the regering, kabinet, and the parliament. So that is usually, and then of course, in the rechterlijke macht, it's the enforcement of the legislation. And of course, it starts with the police and the OM, and it ends with the judges. And of course, the High Council, the Hoge Raad, Raad van State. However, this is really too simple. In practice, it's much more complicated, and that's what I try to sketch on the right. Because the government, you may think we are important, and the green is really the discussion that we have been focusing on today. What is good for the country? If I drive 130, what does it do for the environment? What does it do for the people dying on the streets? If I forbid smoking, how many people will be saved? You know, the entire discussion on what is good for the country. Does this measure actually make the Netherlands a better world, a better country? That's the discussion in green. But the blue, that is where the politicians are, you know, the people in the parliament. Geert Wilders, meneer Baudet, or Boudet, as the chairman of the parliament calls him, Mr. Boudet. I don't know if many of you speak French. If you translate Baudet into French, never mind. And you know what it translates into, yeah. But there's the discussion, is this an acceptable measure? Do we want to take this measure? I mean, for instance, I used to do road safety for 13 years. We had a very fascinating debate on Parliament about the compulsory use of bicycle helmets. From the green point of view, from our point of view, it's a very good measure. It saves hundreds of lives every year. The most people dying in the streets are on cyclists. And for injured, it's even worse. 50% of the people injured on the Dutch roads are cyclists. Half of them could be saved if they would wear a helmet. The people in blue in the parliament say, we don't want that. We're a bicycling country. The Netherlands is a bicycle country, you know. People should be free to choose not to have a helmet. So in the blue is where the discussion about acceptability of the measure is focused, and the red is sort of what I always call the willingness to comply. You know, we can make every measure we want. We can forbid smoking tomorrow. If people keep smoking, we don't have enough cops to actually enforce that. So it's very easy to do things that are good for the country. If people do not comply, there has to be a certain willingness to comply within society. Otherwise, we would end up in a police state or something. We don't want to be that. So this is more the realistic picture. And what really completes the picture is the big purple sphere over there, media. It has always been there, and it will always be there. We must not forget that it is the media that influences us, policy advisors and ministers, but even more the government, the parliament. Because if you look at this nitrogen discussion that's going on now, you know, should the farmers or should not the farmers be forced to sell their land because of the nitrogen crisis? You can look at it from a rational point of view. 46% of the nitrogen is caused by farmers. Get away. At the same time, we feel an empathy for farmers. So it is sad if they lose their job. That's an equally good argument. I'm not saying which argument is better or worse or good or bad, but in the press, they are seen as very good, very sad if we have to take their land. So what happens? The government says, we will not touch the farmers. Is it irrational? I don't think it's irrational. What it is a four-dimensional chess game. We, as policymakers, are continuously playing chess in 4 dimensions. And if there's, I want you to take 2 things home after this. And the first lesson, and I do that from you top lessons, you know, it's always good to be last. Eh? The first lesson is almost identical to what you put with the 4 roles. I put actually 4 balls. Do not forget that policy advisors are playing a 4-dimensional chess game all the time, where content or the rational is only one chess board. Keep that in mind. It will come back at the end. So, the rules of the chess game for 4-dimensional chess. Voila! How not to play 4-dimensional chess. First of all, when I did my PhD, I thought I really knew the future, you know. I mean, you said scientists predict the past, but that's far too modest. We predict the weather. You know, we can predict climate change. We can predict 1,000 years into the future. We are the ones that can predict the future. And we do, all the times. At least we feel we do all the times. We make models, we make assumptions, and then, those models and those assumptions get to the policymakers. And that's where it becomes fascinating, because we know how these predictions come to, how we come to these numbers. I mean, I did my PhD in numerical simulations, and one of the things I was always fascinated about was something simple as weather predictions. I mean, anybody here into weather predictions? I mean, one, yeah. Which is, does anybody drink beer? Oi, 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 weather prediction. We should do what? Well, the way people do weather predictions nowadays, it's always fascinated me, you know, whether it's a very difficult thing to predict. So what we do not do one run, we do 50 or 100 runs. I see you, yeah, thank you for nodding, very good, yeah. We do like 50 or 100, depends a bit on how much time you have runs. And then for every run we tinker a little bit with the initial conditions or the boundary conditions. And then we press run on 50 or 100 computers, and you get 50 or 100 completely different outcomes. And then we throw out the 5 stupid ones here, the 5 stupid ones here, the other 30 we mix up, and we call that a weather prediction. And then, that's how we do it, huh? Yeah, exactly, yeah. PhD. And then it comes out that there's a possibility of 45% in 30 of the scenarios that the rain is more than 1 millimeter tomorrow between 4 and 5. Well, then you take the weather online app, and it says tomorrow it has one of these a cloud with a drop. The only thing, what happened to these boundaries? They've disappeared. All these margins, they've all disappeared. You got your thing, and it says tomorrow afternoon there's rain, and if the rain is bad, then the model sucks. That's I would almost say the arrogance of scientists. We know these margins. By the time they get to the politicians, when they get to policy advisors like me, these margins are forgotten. And what is left is the idea that scientists know the world, pretend to know the world. And really, that is one of the biggest killers, that people come to us and say, you know, this is the truth, this is the future. And then they go, yeah, but of course, you said you have to be very clear about all your conditions and stuff. We don't want to know about the conditions. We have to be very simple to tell it to people in newspapers and everything. And that is where it almost becomes impossible for us to use the results you have. Because, yeah, we cannot cope with these margins. Well, I don't want to take too much time, so no, well, I want to tell one of the... I can tell this joke because I'm in science land here. What I always... as I have I've been walking around in Delft, I sometimes tell this joke about, to make people understand how absurd scientists work, you know, that suppose you have this cow, and then somebody asks, what is the volume of the cow? And then you would have a biologist, a physicist, and a mathematician, all three having been asked the same question. Well, of course, the biologist would take the muscles, put them together, take the bones, put them together, blah, 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 measure a bit and say, well, that's the volume. The physicist would take the cow and put it in a big bowl of water, and then measure the amount of water out of the bowl, blah, blah, blah. And the mathematician would start with, well, let us assume the cow is a box. And that's exactly, and it's good that you're laughing, because you understand where I want to go. This assumption that the cow is a box doesn't land with policymakers. They think, that is strange. A cow is not a box. A cow is a cow. This is a cow. And as a matter of fact, what we're giving them as scientists is a box. And what they expect to be getting is a cow. So remember that. You are dealing with models. We cannot deal with models. Second of all, it's one of the most dangerous frames that scientists use. It's the I warned you frame. Why is it so dangerous? Because the scientist is always right. You know, if you say there's climate change is coming, I warn you, climate change is coming. If policymakers are doing something to prevent it, you can always say, yeah, sure, it's good that I warned you, otherwise we would have climate change. And if we don't do anything, then you can always say, yeah, of course it went wrong. I warned you and you didn't do anything. So, this warning frame, it sounds very intelligent, but it's killing to policymakers because it doesn't give us any reference, it doesn't give us any way of coping with that. And it's the difference between being right and understanding that you're part of this four-dimensional chess game. You can be right, but if you forget that we are in this four-dimensional chess game, then it is useless having the information. One of the most fascinating one in the I told you so is, well, unless you just flew in from the Netherlands last week or so, you've probably heard of the news of these two Tilburg scientists who said that having cats was illegal. No, you haven't? Come on, you're not from the Netherlands, or no? Well, you should start reading nu.nl or so. There's two scientists said there was a discussion about, of course, that we have to save the planet, we have to be green and clean and blah, blah, blah. And these two Tilburg scientists said, well, you cannot even leave your cat outside because it eats all the birds, and the birds are protected species. So it was actually juridically illegal to have your cat outside. Well, it was a brilliant frame, and they might be right from a legal point of view, but everybody thought, oh my God, it's sad you're not of this world. And this is an obvious one, but there are 1,000 more obvious ones. So it's always good if you have knowledge you want to transfer, always think, is this not like an illegal cat thing? And one of the things that I found most fascinating was in the presentation that Paul just gave last on the, he said, well, we had to compute the increase of speed and what it did, and we could not tell the policymakers what it did for the pollution or for the environment. I was the guy asking the question. At that time, it was 2011, I think, 2012, something like that. And the truth is a bit more simple. We, at that time, had mevrouw Schultz van Hagen from the Liberal Party, the VVD. And in the regeerakkoord, I wouldn't know what the word in English is, regeerakkoord. Regeerakkoord? No. It was promised that we would actually increase the speed to 130. We knew it was very bad for road safety. We knew it was very bad for the environment. We knew it was actually very bad for throughput, because you had a very small lane at the beginning, and then you had a highway, and then you had a very small lane at the end. Well, you could go 130, but there would be a traffic jam near the cities. Actually, we calculated with Bart van Arem here of the Delft University of Technology. We knew that. But that's not, the four-dimensional chess game didn't end there. Rationally speaking, there was no reason to go to 130. Not at all. But if this promise is made in government, and many people out there expect to drive 130, then that is also a rational part of the discussion. And then, what we do wrong, of course, is we do not tell that to you, but then we are only interested in, okay, where can we do what society expects from us? So keep that in mind, that sometimes you think it's a very stupid question, but try to stand in our shoes, try to understand why we ask the question. Most people that work for the government are not all stupid, but they play that four-dimensional chess game. It's sometimes, especially now with social media, it's always good. What I always really find fascinating, after we write a letter to Parliament, I always look at these comments that people put under these news articles, you know, because they are a very interesting vox pop. And then I think, oh my God, is that what you really think? I couldn't think that that might be your comment. But that gives you a really broader frame on society. Well, let me speed up. I think I said most of this. Try to not have this tunnel vision. Content is good, but it's insufficient to understand why policymakers might not take up what you bring us for information. It's the same, yeah, it's like your evidence-based politics. Of course, every measure we suggest has to be based on evidence. That's why if you imaginary take the screen back, you had a big green ball saying government. Of course, we will never take measures that will not try to solve the problem. I mean, why would you put a bicycle helmet if it's unsafe to wear a bicycle helmet? So in that sense, every policy is evidence-based. But the fact that something might be a good thing to do doesn't make it a good policy. I mean, a very simple solution, a very simple remark is always smoking. I mean, smoking is still not forbidden in the Netherlands. Everybody knows it's a very stupid thing to do. It's bad for health, blah, 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 blah. And still we do not forbid smoking. So why isn't that evidence-based politics? No. In the four-dimensional chess game, apparently, forbidding smoking might not be the smartest move. I'm not going to explain why it's not the smartest move, but try to think for yourself. Especially as a scientist, it might be boggling that you think, why do we not stop smoking? It's such a good idea, of course, but still we have very good, well, I'm not in that field of study, but still it's very good reasons not to do that. Okay, so what do you do? How do you play this four-dimensional chess game right? Of course, you can buy into the projects that, as you suggested so well, Paul, of course we buy in knowledge. We subsidize knowledge. But at the same time, we policymakers are craving for this knowledge. You only don't know when or where you're going to need this knowledge. So I think the way that Kaplan is doing is brilliant. Now you have to get into structural relations with these policy advisors and with these ministers. And maybe policy advisors is even better, because ministers change every 4 years. Policy advisors stick there for at least 13 years, so it's me. So try to just, and not try always to convince them, but try to make them understand what knowledge you're doing. Usually, and there's a time and place for everything, and as a matter of fact, the TU Delft has many relations with many special universities. On the right, there's Tim van der Hagen, you know him, the boss of the government, of the TU Delft, with the Rijkswaterstaat boss at that time, my boss, Jan-Hendrik Donkers. There's the STAD project, Bart van Arem is working on that, a very big consortium. You can get a lot of attention for your research. You can hear why people think some parts of the research are good or bad. And it's where the Delft municipality is working together with our ministry. So, step one, do not wait until you have something to tell. Start now. There will be a moment that your research will be interesting. And I think, having said that, I think that's almost a summary of what I want to say. Do not think that you have to convince policymakers. There's a time and a place for everything. Under the last minister, Schultz van Hagen, automatic driving was a very hot thing. And there was already research on automatic driving. So we said, can we use that? And it's very effective then to plug in the research at the moment we think it's needed. And yeah, some topics will always remain actual, like road safety or so. And sometimes you have to be lucky, you know, the RIVM, it's a boring institute in Beeldhoven until 2-3 months ago. You know, and then everybody thought, oh, RIVM, they seem to have a lot of knowledge on PAS, on PFAS, on nitrogen. So if it becomes politically interesting, people will always come to you. So do not be modest. Because, and this is the one with last slide, knowledge will always be the base of policy making. I have just 2 examples. In the stint, when the stint example accident was there, we really asked TNO, can you help us to find what was wrong with the apparatus? We asked the SWOF, the Road Safety Institute, can you help us come up with new rules? The same with the nitrogen, you know, RIVM is really generating all the knowledge we need. We do need the knowledge. Maybe not at the time you think we need it. There's a time and a place for everything. And so, in summary, lesson 1, do not forget, it is a 4-dimensional chess game. Do not stand in our shoes. Realize that if we don't seem to listen to you, it might not be because we're stupid who do not understand what you're saying. It might be there's other reasons why we're not taking your advice. And we always have to play this 4-dimensional chess game. And the last one, do not fear, just contact the people. Every ministry has an email account that you can always email. Every member of parliament has an email, has a number. They will never eat you, usually, and they will almost always be interested in what you have to say. I don't know why, but people are always a bit fearful to join that or to come over and discuss. And maybe at a politically low time, you know, just come over and discuss with us. I have people from the TU Delft, but also from Rathenau Institute. They send me a mail, this might be of interest to you. And then I look and I think, well, let's have a cup of coffee. So the bridge you have to cross, maybe, but you are the expert on this, is much smaller and less complex than you think. So we need your knowledge. And the fact that we're not taking your knowledge into account doesn't mean that we haven't listened to you. Maybe we'll listen to you next time. Having said that, thank you for having me here. Thank you for having listened to me. Let's have the beer that we also crave for. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robbert.